Father, we thank you for tonight. Thank you for the beautiful evening that you have blessed us with. And Lord, it's our privilege this evening to dig into this next point and the evidence that we find philosophically and scientifically that points to your existence. Father, I know for some people tonight it might be a little bit of a stretch in terms of just getting their minds around some of the concepts. But Father, I remember that was me a number of years ago where I just couldn't get it. But Lord, as you began to work in my heart and mind, you helped me to come to understand these things. And I pray that you would do the same for each student here tonight, that everyone, Lord, would just relax and enjoy the time that we have together tonight. Listen to the information and recognize they don't need to understand every single point tonight. But later as they read the material and maybe rewatch the video, Lord, that every time they think about it, that you will continue to build on what they do know until they have a full comprehension of each of these points. And so, Lord, we pray tonight that you would walk amongst us, that you would teach us, that you give us ears to hear, a mind to comprehend, and a heart that is open and ready to receive what you want to speak to us tonight. Bless our time together, and we know that you will, because we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, homework review. So, for those of you taking credit, be sure to turn in your homework. If you haven't done it yet, I've got a little place under the podium where you can add your homework at the break time, and I'll get that back to you. Someone recite John 14:6. It's one we probably all know. Someone, that was our assignment. What do you got? Jesus said, Amen. So that is a very significant statement, because if Jesus is true, then everyone else that opposes that is false. Anyone that says there's another way, by the way, including the present Pope, who says that there are other ways. No, there's only one way, and that one way is through Jesus Christ. All right, point 2 in our 12 points. What is the second point? Somebody tell me that. Point 1, truth about reality is knowable. Point 2 is the opposite of true is false. So we got point 2, and now we're moving to point 3, and here are the 12 points, and in yellow is point 3. That's what we'll be looking at tonight. It is true that the theistic God exists. So again, we have those first 2 points. Truth about reality is knowable. We established that that is true, that truth is absolute. It's true for all people in all places at all times. The opposite of true is false. Now we want to extend to it is true that the theistic God exists. And what we're going to do is look at evidence outside of the Bible, just observational evidence, scientific evidence, philosophical evidence, moral evidence, etc., to show that God exists. So here's our objectives tonight and next week. I want to provide a reasonable arguments for theistic worldview. Theism, remember, is the view that the one God described in the Bible exists. Remember, atheist is without God. So in front of theism, without God. This is God, theistic worldview, point 3. And we'll cover that in 2 parts. And then we want to define the different worldviews of God, which we'll do tonight, so that you can see all of the different views that people hold in the world that are opposed to theism. We want to state a philosophical argument for the existence of God, and that's important because the skeptic does not believe the Bible. So we have to offer them a philosophical, a logical, or a scientific argument that they can agree in terms of observation of the world and how it works to prove the existence of God. And we want to explore that evidence that supports arguments for the existence of God. And then we want to demonstrate the God of philosophy is the same as the God of the Bible. In other words, those who are, for example, Aristotle in his metaphysics, his work of metaphysics. So physics, right, is a study of the way the world works. Meta means after physics, and that was the work that Aristotle did afterwards, concerning the things outside of the material universe. And his observations, for the most part, line up with the declaration of Scripture. And so we can use philosophy again to show that the God of philosophy, that you can just think about by observation of the universe, is the same as the God of the Bible. In other words, we can prove that God exists using only logic and philosophy, which is important when dealing with people who don't believe the Bible. And then we want to internalize the demonstration of God's existence. And what that means is I want you to be able to take the arguments that we'll look at this week and next week. You'll hear them in class. You'll read about it in your textbook. And if you want to watch Norman Geisler's video, I have it on our website, so you can watch his presentation of the same information. We're about 2 weeks behind, but then we'll put our presentation up online. And so you can review it until it clicks in your head so that it's workable knowledge that you can share with those who don't believe. So I have a new slide, relax and ruminate. In other words, again, we're going to cover some interesting and deep philosophical and scientific arguments. And for some of you, you're just going to be like, it's going to fly right over your head. That's okay. Just relax, get what you can get. And the handouts, by the way, have all the kind of the prevalent points that I'll be talking about that you can make notes on. And then again, what you don't get when you read the book and the chapter that covers what we cover tonight and next week, it's going to make more sense. Then if you decide to watch again those videos, it'll make more sense until you get it. And of course, you've always got me as a resource, either Tuesday nights or Sundays. Come and ask me to clarify something that you don't quite understand, and we'll do that. So let's begin. The question that we're dealing with, does God exist? And so what you see here is a photo from the James Webb Telescope looking back 13.1 billion light years away from Earth at galaxies that exist. That's how far away they are in terms of the light years away from the Earth. So what an amazing time we live in that we can have these photos of things that you would never be able to see from planet Earth. Just couldn't see it, not even with a telescope. You have to get out into space, past the atmosphere, to be able to have a telescope that can see that far out. Well, skeptics would argue that if God existed, then we ought to be able to see him by now. In other words, we're able to look 13.1 billion years away in terms of universes and galaxies, we ought to be able to see God by now. And I would argue that you can, and in fact, I'm going to recommend a book tonight. It's on your resources. It's called Show Me God by Fred Harim. And he looks at the history of physics and astrophysicists and demonstrates conclusively that physicists, even those who were atheistic or pantheistic, and we'll talk about some of them tonight, the discoveries in the 20th century literally rocked the world of astrophysicists or astrophysics, because what it demonstrated, what we were observing scientifically, is that God's fingerprints are all over the universe. God is talking. Yes, Vanessa? I'm sorry? The authors, thank you. Fred Harim, H-E-E-R-E-M, or E-N, excuse me. And all of this is on the website. When we get to the resources, I'll show you at the end of class tonight. I've listed that book for you. So here's a quick little video, if it works, that is going to show from James Webb, as it peers into the universe going back 500 million years. So let's see if it works. So what incredible technology, looking back 500 million light years at this cartwheel galaxy that, again, you cannot see from planet Earth. And it's out there, right? It's like, wow. And in that galaxy, perhaps billions of stars and planets and all. Fascinating. All right. Moving on. We're going to show this evening, we're going to show to skeptics that the scientific and philosophical evidence all points to the existence of God. That's a pulsar wind nebula in the picture, and you can see it kind of looks a little bit like a hand, like this, and it was named by NASA the Hand of God. Interesting. All this is important because many do not believe that God exists. And so we want to be equipped to be able to provide evidence without using the scripture because they don't believe in that, show them logical, philosophical, and scientific evidence that God does exist. So here are the four horsemen of modern atheism. The point is that we need a robust argument, in other words, something that is irrefutable and something that is convincing to respond to the attacks of the new atheists. In other words, these are the contemporaries, such as Michael Onfray, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Victor Stenger, who all say that God does not exist. Though you will find out, as I share some of their quotations from their research, that they really do know that God's out there. They just willfully choose not to believe. In other words, they know the evidence points to God, but they reject the evidence. And I'll show that tonight. So I thought this was an interesting little meme. Adults with imaginary friends are stupid. And notice we're involved in that, the cross, right? Imaginary friends like, i.e. God, Jesus. Well, yeah, if I saw them in the back of a car, I would be tempted to run into them, but I choose not to because I want to show grace. But that brings up a great question. Are there many people in the world who deny that God exists? In other words, here we are at Calvary Chapel Modesto, and probably your work environment, your home environment, you're probably surrounded to a great degree by people who believe that God exists. So kind of the question is, well, how important is this information? I mean, are there really that many people in the world that don't believe in God? And of course there are. And so how many people are atheists? So just a quick review. Most Buddhists are atheists. So when you look at Southeast Asia, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, et cetera, those who practice Buddhism are almost exclusively atheists. They don't believe in God. They believe in a force, kind of like in pantheism, but they don't believe in a personal God. Most secular humanists are atheists. That's important because secular humanism has a huge pull in the National Teachers Association, and most of the curriculum developed for students today in the United States in primary and secondary is written by secular humanists who deny the existence of God. All Marxists are atheists. In other words, communism. The very foundation of communism is that God does not exist. And so we talk about China, we talk about Russia, we talk about any, Cuba, any communist nation. If they're a true communist, then they deny that God exists. Now, I don't know how dated this information is, but 5% of Americans are atheists. 20% or 30% of Brits are atheists, which is tragic because in the 19th century, Britain was the primary mission-sending organization on planet Earth. They sent more missionaries to more parts of the world than any other nation at the time, and now 30% of Brits are without a belief in God. 60% of Swedes are atheists, 80% of Russians are atheists. And again, this is, I don't know how old this information is, but you could probably go 1 or 2% either way on that. But obviously, a significant portion of the world do not believe that the God of the Bible exists. But atheists even have their own church, which is interesting. Why would you have a church if you don't believe in God? And we'll get to that later. It's called the religious need argument. It's called the Unitarian Universalist, and we have one right here in Modesto on Kiernan Avenue. There it is. And so as you drive by, just remember to pray for them. Ask the Lord to reveal to them that He is real, that He is true, and that there is a way to salvation and a relationship with Him. I pray that every time when I'm out cycling, when I'm on, I think it's Kodiak, I think it is, there's a Mormon ward there. And so every time I go by, I'm like, Lord, deliver them from their false gospel, their false prophet, right? Bring Jesus to them, Same thing, I drive by these guys and, Old Testament Paul wants to call fire from heaven and just like toast the thing. New Testament Paul's like, Lord, save them, right? Because I used to be an unbeliever. All right, well, back to our question, does God exist? If God exists, then miracles are possible. In other words, if the God of theism, the God revealed in Scripture exists, a God who is supernatural, a God who exists beyond creation, not part of creation, but beyond creation, who created all things, then miracles are possible. And the biggest one of all, the creation event, where He created the universe, right? Truth is absolute. Morality is absolute. In other words, if the theistic God exists, the God who, through the prophets, penned the scripture, where he describes how we are to live our lives, well, that is not negotiable. It's absolute, right? Morality. And his truth is absolute. The Bible would be credible. Important. Life is sacred. Without God, life isn't sacred. You look at Marxism, and the only value a person has is what they can contribute to the collective. If you cannot contribute, you have no value to society, in a Marxist society. But Christianity, right, the God of theism recognizes that every human being has been created in the image of God. Every human being is significant. Every life is sacred. That's radically different than, again, people who deny that God exists. If God exists, we have an ultimate purpose: to know God, to bring him glory, right? And people are accountable to God. If God doesn't exist, and by the way, that's a little pendant you can buy on Amazon if you want to be an atheist. It's kind of like you got your A there for atheist, yes. And then an atom, right? An atom, why? Because they believe that all that exists is the material universe. They don't believe that there's anything beyond the material universe. So it shows an atom. So if God does not exist, then miracles are not possible, because by definition, a miracle is supernatural, beyond what is possible naturally. Truth is not absolute. Truth is whatever you want it to be. Morals are not absolute. And so you can do whatever you want to do, right? Because there's no one to be accountable to. You, as an individual, get to decide what is right and what is wrong. If God does not exist, then the Bible is not credible, right? Because it wasn't written by prophets inspired by the Holy Spirit. Life is not sacred. Life has no ultimate purpose. And we're going to see that demonstrated when we get to Bertrand Russell this evening and read his very dismal estimation of what life is all about. And finally, if God doesn't exist, we're not accountable to anyone except ourselves. That's kind of sounds frightening, because literally that's what describes chaos. That's the definition of chaos, right? Where every single individual gets to decide what is right in their own minds. Which, by the way, is exactly how the world was described before the flood of Noah's day, where everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and they did not find themselves accountable to God. Well, that sounds hopeless. And there's Bertrand Russell, and you can tell he looks hopeless. I mean, that's just not you see that face, it's like, man, you could curdle milk. I mean, right? How hopeless is it? Well, I'm going to quote Bertrand Russell, another one of our English atheists. Here's what he said, and I know it's hard to read, so I'll read it for you, but it's on the website. You can download. And I'm quoting. He says, "Man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving." In other words, there's no purpose, no design, nothing. His origin, that's you and me, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his loves, his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms. In other words, it's just random chance. All the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system. And the whole temple of man's achievements, in other words, every single thing that anyone has ever done, build the pyramids, right? Conquer the Mount Everest, do away with poverty, solve the hunger problem, whatever, all of that, that achievements, he says, must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. Yeah, that'll curdle milk. I mean, that's the skeptic's view, right? In other words, without God, that's what you get. All right, moving on, the definition of God's existence. By definition, the theistic God is a supernatural being. And by supernatural, we mean he is beyond the material realm, beyond nature, right? We talk about the world, the universe, people, animals, the planets, the stars, space, time, all of that. He exists beyond that. That is his beyond the natural universe. And I didn't have a picture of God. He wasn't sharing on Facebook, so I got a picture of a beautiful day with a bright sunshine. You can imagine that's the light. Okay. God alone is all-powerful, all-intelligent, morally perfect, creator of all things, etc., etc., etc. Additionally, he transcends the universe as creation. In other words, he's above it and beyond it. He's not part of it, and he is immanent. Notice that's not spelled with an I. It's I-M-M-A, not I. That is, he can intervene in the world as he chooses. In other words, the theistic God is able to enter time and space and interact with human beings. Okay, now we're going to look at deists. Deists believe there's a God out there who transcends the universe, but they don't believe he actually works in the universe anymore. This is the theistic God, the God revealed in the Bible, the God revealed in creation. Remember again, Romans chapter 1, general revelation, Psalm 19, general revelation. He is the God who put eternity in the heart of every person, Ecclesiastes 3. And the God who provides hope to people, unlike skeptics who tell us that there's hopelessness. It's all just a vast nothing. It's all ruin. And it's like, okay. But theism is just one of 7 competing worldviews. So you have theism and then these 6 general categories. We have deism, and so when we talk about the founding fathers of the United States, most of them were deists. So Thomas Paine, for example, again, they believed that God existed, but that he no longer participated in the world. In other words, they believed that he kind of created the world like a clock. You wind it up, and then you set it on a shelf, and it just ticks down. Tick, 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 but he doesn't touch it anymore. Finite Godism, Rabbi Kushner, and we'll look at each of these in a moment. Atheism, Stephen Hawking. Pantheism, Albert Einstein. A lot of people mistakenly, Christians, post on Facebook, social media, quotes from Albert Einstein trying to make him a Christian. He was never a Christian. He went from atheism to pantheism. Pantheism to agnosticism, Panentheism, so notice there's an Ian in there, Alfred North Whitehead, and then polytheism, Joseph Smith, and he founded what cult? Mormonism. Okay, so let's define those real quick. Theism says that there is an infinite, independent, personal creator who exists beyond the world, created everything that exists from nothing, and is able to intervene in the creation. God is transcendent, that means above and beyond, and he's immanent, meaning he can interact in the universe. So, for example, when God brought the flood, that's God interacting in the universe. When he brought the 10 plagues, that's God interacting on the world that he created. When God became a man, took on a human body, and was born in a manger, right? Jesus Christ, God incarnate, he's interacting with his creation. He transcends it, but he's able to act in it. And thus, miracles are possible. In other words, a supernatural God is able to do supernatural works. Turn water into wine, raise dead people to life, cleanse the leper, right? Calm a sea, divide a sea, do things that are literally impossible in the natural realm. A supernatural God can make those things happen. Moving on, deism. Deism says that there is a God, but that he does not act in the world today. That is, they believe God is transcendent, but not immanent. Famously, remember, I'm going to forget his name now, founding father who said, God helps them who help themselves. Who was that? No, not George. One that went to France, ambassador of France. Ben Franklin. So think about it. God helps them who help themselves, because they don't believe that God helps us. That's the deistic worldview. Thus, there are no miracles because God doesn't work in the universe today. Moving on to finite Godism, right? Already you're kind of thinking, this doesn't sound good. Because the God we worship is infinite, right? Not finite. Finite Godism, that sounds like a little God. And in fact, it is. Finite Godism says that a God exists who is limited in power or perfection. They believe that he lacks the power to stop evil. Thus, miracles are not possible. Now, one of those, the prominent advocates of this in the 20th century was Rabbi Kushner, not related to Jared, okay? And in response to the horrors of the Second World War, and specifically the Nazi persecution of the Jewish people, rabbis were asking, where is God, right? Why did God allow this to happen? And so many of them retreated from Judaism to this form of religious belief, which is called finite godism. So here's what Rabbi Kushner liked to say. We need to forgive God because he is limited. He can't do any better than this, and we need to go on and live our lives. It's like, well then, what's the point? I mean, right? Why would you worship a God like that? Then we have atheism. Atheism says that there is no God at all. Everything we see in the universe is the result of random chance. Nothing exists beyond the material natural world. So you'll hear people philosophically talk about open and closed systems. A closed system is the atheistic worldview. All there is the material world. An open system is that view that there is a spiritual realm, God, who is able to interact in the natural realm. But those who are atheists believe that this system is closed. There's no input from anywhere else other than what is natural. Therefore, miracles are not possible. So again, one of the great atheists of the day, Stephen Hawking, said, religion is a fairy tale for those afraid of the dark. To which John Lennox, who is a theoretical mathematician and bioethicist and apologist at Oxford University, responded, atheism is a fairy tale for those who are afraid of the light. So it's like, there you go. Pantheism. Pantheism says that God is the universe. In other words, not an individual, not a person. The universe is God. The flower is God. The cow is God. You are God. Water is God. God is the universe. Pantheists do not believe in a personal God. Rather, they believe in a divine essence or impersonal force or cosmic energy that flows throughout all things in the universe. So, Star Wars, right? George Lucas's world is all about the force. It's an impersonal force that you can tap into and use for good or evil. It's the yin-yang, right, of Taoism, or Taoism, however you prefer to say it, the religion of, or worldview, of Buddhism primarily, pantheism. Therefore, pantheists believe that since we are part of the universe, we are divine, okay? And this is where I wonder where, Scientology and Tom Cruise fits in, right? So Deepak Chopra writes, and I quote, in reality, we are divinity in disguise, and gods and goddesses in embryo that are contained within us seek to be fully materialized. In other words, it's a process as we are seeking to become one with the universe. True success, therefore, is the experience of the miraculous. It is the unfolding of the divinity within us. So that's like we're becoming one with the force, or the one with the great nothingness. So moving on, we got Albert Einstein. I quote, he wrote, we see the universe marvelously arranged, obeying certain laws, but we understand the laws only dimly. Our limited minds cannot grasp the mysterious force that sways the constellations. I am fascinated by Spinoza's pantheism. So Baruch Spinoza was a Dutch or Belgium, I can't remember, Dutch or Flemish, I can't remember, theologian. And so Einstein was fascinated by his view of the world and as he looked at it. So here's what he said, I admire even more his contributions to modern thought. Spinoza is the greatest of modern philosophers because he is the first philosopher who deals with the soul and the body, notice, as one, right? Pantheism says the universe is God. We are all God. Flowers are God. Water is God. Frogs are God. It's all one. So you can see where he's going. The body and the soul are one. There's no separation. Not as two separate things. So that's Einstein. And then I need to mention Mr. Musk because I had a student in a class a year or two ago send me a little clip from an interview with Elon Musk and the two guys that run the Babylon Bee, which is a satirical website and often very funny. In any event, during that, they were pressing him on the person of Jesus in this interview, and Elon Musk goes to great lengths to say, listen, I would never stand in the way of anybody in Jesus. And so there's all this language that he's using that sounds like, man, he's either like right there or he's a Christian, and it kind of ends with this idea that he is, unless you're listening. And now that you're going to be educated, you'll be listening, okay? So I get this email, or not email, this text from a friend of mine with his interview. He says, look, Elon's a Christian. No, listen, he is not a Christian, as some wrongly concluded from an interview on the Babylon Bee. Rather, he said, Elon Musk says in the interview, I followed the God of Spinoza. That's pantheism. That's not Christianity. That's to say, Elon Musk is a pantheist. He believes that the universe is God. And that might have something to do with his ego, because as we read from Deepak Chopra, right, we are divinity, right, looking to be expressed. Then there's panentheism. Notice there's an en in the middle of that, so it's not pantheism, it's panentheism, right? See the en says that God is in versus is all. In other words, God isn't the universe, rather he's in the universe. Panentheists say that God has two poles, an actual pole and a potential pole, defined this way. One pole is God's mind, his potential, his thoughts. The other pole is his body, the universe. So it's two parts. Okay? God is not separate from the universe, rather he's in the universe. It's sometimes called bipolar theism, which ought to scare you, right? And process theology, as adherents believe that God is always progressing, he's always changing. Well, again, that's not the God that's described in the Bible. As I taught a couple weeks or months ago when we talked about God's immutability, the God of the Bible is unchanging. But the God of panentheism is always changing. This view renders God to be finite instead of infinite. He is said to be changing to adapt to the effects of the universe upon him. In other words, as people do what they do, as the universe does what it does, he's always constantly dodging and weaving and having to change to accommodate himself to what's happening. Obviously, he's not a God who's in control, right? So he's not sovereign. Therefore, the God of panentheism is neither all-powerful nor is he all good, because he needs to do whatever he needs to do to kind of keep things under control. And in this view, miracles are not possible, because God's in the universe, not beyond the universe. And then polytheism. Polytheism says that there are many gods and goddesses. And so when we read about the Canaanites and most of the people that lived in Canaan before the children of Israel conquered it, most of them were pantheists. They believed in various gods and goddesses, right? The Greeks and the Romans, mythology, Hinduism, right? Those are all pantheistic religions. However, these gods they believe in are limited, that is, they're finite. Each god and goddess is believed to rule over their own domain. For example, one god is a god of the sky, another the god of the water, god of the moon, a god of war, a god of peace, a god of fertility, a god of this, a mountain, hill, whatever. So all these gods and goddesses in their view kind of have like little domains they have control over, but outside of those domains they're weak. And you remember when the Syrians attacked Israel, they were defeated in the plains or in the mountains, and so they said, you know, their God is a God of the hills, but if we fight them on the plain, then we'll beat them, right? And God's all, watch this, right? Whoops them in the plain too. It's like, darn it, he's a God of everywhere. Now, a subcategory of polytheism is called henotheism. And this is the view that there exists one chief God who rules over the other gods and goddesses. And so here's three examples. In Wicca, there is a triple goddess who is the chief goddess who rules over all other Wiccan gods and goddesses. In Greek and Roman mythology, you have Zeus, also called Jupiter. And then in Mormonism, you have Elohim, who's supposed to be the chief god, along with Jesus, his son, over all the other gods and goddesses, which if you're a good Mormon man, right, you get to be a god at the resurrection of your own planet. So these are religions who believe, they're polytheistic, believe in many gods and goddesses, and then there's this kind of subcategory called henotheism where there's a chief god over all of them. Strictly speaking, polytheists do not believe in miracles such as raising the dead. They do believe that their gods and goddesses can work within their domain of power, notice, by manipulating nature. They're not supernatural, but they can kind of toy with and fiddle around with nature to make it do what they want it to do. They can't go beyond it or above it, but they can play with it. So here's an example. Baal was the storm god worshipped in the Old Testament, who can supposedly manipulate the sky to bring rain in response to the worship of his followers. So remember when Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal. And he said, okay, you guys worship the storm god, let's bring rain, right? And he says, you do your thing and you call for rain. Let's see what happens. Nothing. Remember? And so then he builds his own altar, right? And he says, pour water on it, pour water on it, pour water on it. And he says, the God who answers by fire, and Baal was supposed to control the clouds and the lightning. And of course, when Elijah called on the true and the living God, the God of theism, kazoom, right? Fire from heaven consumed the sacrifice, the altar, that licked up the water, and everybody fell on their face and said, Yahweh's God, right? Not Baal. So that tells us, when we're talking about miracles, the polytheist believes in what they call a weak miracle. They don't really believe in miracles. They just believe their gods can manipulate nature. A strong miracle is the God who is supernatural, goes above and beyond what is natural. So again, in the courtroom of Pharaoh, you'll remember, and I think I mentioned before, the magicians of Pharaoh were able to duplicate the first 4 miracles that Moses did, but then when Moses struck the earth and turned dust into living beings, they said, this is the finger of God. In other words, like, we're out of our league, because their gods can't do that stuff. All they can do is pretend. All right, bottom line. Since these views oppose each other, we learned last week the opposite of true is false. You have 7 worldviews. Each and every one of them is distinct. They all oppose the other. So if one of them's true, the other 6 are false. Does that make sense? If one's true, the others are false. They can't all be true. And we will show in our time together, we will present arguments and evidence that demonstrate that only theism is true. And so we'll begin tonight by talking about it is true that the theistic God, not the polytheistic, not the pantheistic, not the panentheistic, right? But the theistic God is the only true God. So we want to talk about some evidence. And this is where you start to get the stuff you can share with your friends at work and people in school and all that. There are a number of different types of arguments, again, apologetics, that are put forth for the existence of theistic God. They are as follows. Number 1, the cosmological argument. And we'll get into each of these tonight, but just kind of give you the overview. Argues from creation. In other words, looks at evidence of a supernatural creator. In other words, we should be able to look at creation by scientific observation and find evidence for a creator, and we do, and we'll talk about that. And then there's the teleological argument, which argues from design, right? And that says there's evidence of a supernatural designer who made all things. And this was advanced by William Paley in the 19th century, who used the analogy of a watch, right? If you're wandering through a forest and you stumble upon a watch, in his day a pocket watch, you open it up, it's this finely crafted piece of gold. You open it up and there's this beautiful crystal cover, and inside there's a secondhand tick, 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 and then you open it up and you see all the mechanics inside. You realize this didn't just fall on the ground. Somebody designed this thing, right? By the way, that's why Richard Dawkins, when he wrote his book promoting atheism, he called it The Blind Watchmaker. Kind of trying to be cute. Then there's the moral argument, argues from a universal morality. In other words, there's evidence of an absolute moral lawgiver, and C.S. Lewis perhaps did the best work on that, most recently anyway, where he looks at cultures around the world and shows that there is a universal morality, right? Even for people who have never even interacted with one another, going back all the way to the beginning. And that is evidence for an absolute moral lawgiver. In other words, they each got those morals from somewhere, and that somewhere is God. And then there's the religious argument, which is arguing from the human need for God. And again, even atheists have churches. It's like, why would you have a church? And what do you do there? Anyway, evidence for the existence of God who meets our need. And again, C.S. Lewis advances that argument in Mere Christianity. All right, so we'll look at the first one. The cosmological argument. It argues from creation. So we want to look at what evidence is available that demonstrates that the God of theism exists. So the cosmological argument has two forms. There's the horizontal argument, and I'll define all these in a moment, and there's the vertical argument, okay? Cosmological argument is also called, is also called the Kalam or Kalim argument, which is Arabic for eternal, and here's how it goes. Number one, horizontal, in other words, from beginning to end, okay? Horizontal. Everything that begins has a beginning, had a cause. And that's because things that begin cannot cause themselves to exist, right? If you don't exist, you can't make yourself exist, right? Does that make sense? So anything that has a beginning had to be caused by something. Number two, the universe had a beginning. Number three, therefore the universe had a cause. And so we're going to demonstrate, I think, unequivocally that the universe had a beginning tonight. Not it didn't begin tonight. We're going to demonstrate that it has begun. All right. The critical point of this argument is that everyone acknowledges that anything that had a beginning, this is important, is not infinite, right? Infinite means there's no beginning, no end. If it has a beginning, it's finite. If it has a beginning, it could not have caused itself. There's some other cause, right? That is, it hasn't always been here. And we want to show tonight that the universe hasn't always been here. If the universe hasn't always been here, then it had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, then something caused it to begin. And the important question for us, what caused the universe to begin? So it's really easy. There are only three causes that produce effects. The foundational truth for all scientific knowledge. So if we're talking about scientific knowledge, in other words, the scientific method, right? All that is based on cause and effect. We see a material effect, and we seek to understand its cause, right? In other words, if I drop this book, it'll fall on the floor. If I take this book to the top of Mount Everest and I drop it, it falls on the mountain. If I go to the bottom of the ocean, I drop it, it still goes down. It always goes down. So I think to myself, all right, the material effect is that I drop the book, it always falls. What causes it to fall? So then I develop a hypothesis, and I begin to test that, and eventually, hopefully, get to the point where I have a law, the law of gravity, for example. So all scientific knowledge is based on the laws of cause and effect. We see an effect, we seek to know its cause. Every material effect has a cause. If we reject this truth, then we cannot rightly claim to practice science. Now, that's not Paul's opinion. That's not Norman Geisler's opinion. That is the foundation of science as taught in every university in the world. So by way of example, I'm now quoting from W.T. Hale, professor of philosophy of Princeton University, who wrote on the critical history of Greek philosophy and spoke on science. And I quote, "Every student of logic knows that this is the ultimate canon of the sciences." In other words, it's the canon, right? Like we have the canon of Scripture. This is what's been handed down to us as truth. So the canon of science, the truth, the foundation of science. He says the foundation of them all. In other words, biology, chemistry, electromagnetism, whatever science you're going to be, all of them is founded on this. If we did not believe the truth of causation, namely, everything which has a beginning has a cause, and that in the same circumstances, the same things invariably happen, all the sciences would at once crumble to dust. In every scientific investigation, this truth is assumed. And so if you're doing research to create a vaccine, or you're looking for a cure for cancer, or if you're doing research in metallurgy to create a lighter kind of metal that will make planes fly higher and faster and use less fuel, whatever scientific inquiry you're involved in, it's based on causation. Every material effect has a cause. Without that, you don't practice science. We can show by logic and science that the universe, a material effect, was caused to exist. That is to say, the universe had a beginning. And that the cause which brought the universe into existence cannot be material, but must be supernatural. In other words, whatever caused it to exist can't be part of what is in existence, can't be part of the universe. And we'll see that in a moment. Now, there are only three logical types of causes. So you have an effect, and there's only three ways that you get this effect, right? So you got a universe. There's only three ways it got here. Number one, it was self-caused. It caused itself to happen. Number two is uncaused. That means it's infinite. It's always been here. Number three, it was caused by another. Those are literally, these are the only three logical causes that produce an effect. So when the universe, right, how did it come into be? Was it caused by itself? Is it infinite, always been here? Or did something or someone else cause it to exist? Well, self-caused. As we've already stated, it is ontologically impossible to cause oneself to exist. Ontological is the fancy word to describe the nature of being. So when we talk about the universe, the nature of the universe, if it doesn't exist, it can't cause itself to exist, right? For you, or in this case, the universe would have to already exist to cause anything. Does that make sense? If you don't exist, you can't cause anything. So if you don't exist, then you cannot cause anything to exist, most especially yourself. So the universe cannot be self-caused. Does that make sense? By the way, that is undeniable, right? And even Richard Dawkins and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, of New Atheism, they recognize they're stuck here, that you cannot deny this. Moving on, uncaused. If the universe is uncaused, then it did not have a beginning. That would mean the universe is infinite. It's just always been here, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and it will always be here forever and ever, and it just goes on and on and on. But we can show through scientific observation that the universe had a beginning, which would mean that the universe is finite, not infinite. If it had a beginning, it's not infinite, it's finite. Therefore, it cannot be uncaused. So it can't be self-caused. You can't cause yourself to exist. We're going to demonstrate that it cannot be uncaused or infinite, which means the only option left is caused by another. So we can prove by scientific observation that the universe had a beginning, and here's your first proof text. It's called Surge, which is an acrostic for second law of thermodynamics, universe is expanding, radiation echo, great mass, Einstein's error. So see that surge, right? Now again, you're going to go through and wait, I'll never remember this. Yes, you will. You will. Let's start with the first one, second law of thermodynamics. So the second law of thermodynamics states that the universe is running out of usable energy. So according to Einstein, energy is neither created nor destroyed. But usable energy, right, is we're running out of. In other words, for example, once hydrogen in the sun is expressed as heat and turns into helium, it can never be recaptured, okay? And so if you're a mathematician, there's second law of thermodynamics. Don't ask me to do the math. In other words, what is running down is not infinite, right? I would assume that if you have a vehicle, whether it's diesel or gasoline-powered or electric, if you don't recharge it or if you put gas or diesel in it, it will stop, correct? Because you do not have an infinite supply of energy. You use up the energy and it's gone, right? What is running down is not infinite. Well, the second law of thermodynamics, which is universally accepted in science, tells us that the usable energy in the universe is running out. So, in other words, it had a full point, and we're running out of it. Well, if it had a full point, and we're running out of it, that means it can't be infinite. If it's infinite, it just goes on and on and on and on and on. You never run out. But we're running out. Therefore, the universe had a beginning when it was fully charged, and it's running out. Does that make sense? Come on. Do I get an amen? No. All right. What has a beginning has a cause. The universe had a cause. Therefore, the universe cannot be uncaused. We're running out of energy. It had a starting point where it was full. That's the S in Surge. We move to U, the universe is expanding. In 1927, Edwin Hubble, for who the Hubble spacecraft is named, observed evidence that the universe is expanding. By the way, Edwin Hubble, along with Eddington and Einstein, did not want this to be the result of their research. All three held to pantheism. They wanted the universe to be infinite. But in 1927, here in the United States of America, Edwin Hubble observed that the universe is expanding. And what is expanding is not infinite, because an infinite doesn't get bigger. Does that make sense? If it's infinite, it can't get bigger. It's infinite. There's no getting any bigger than it already is, right? An infinite, you can't add another day to an infinite, right? Can't add another second to an infinite. It's infinite. Well, if it's expanding, it's not infinite. That's a problem. If the universe is expanding, then it is finite. Whatever is finite had a beginning. What had a beginning had a cause. The universe, therefore, has a cause. And therefore, the universe cannot be uncaused. Are you tracking? We move to the radiation echo. So, yes, sir, Phil. So we are able to observe that the universe is pushing outwards. I don't remember the speed that it's expanding, but we can literally see it's moving out from a central point. It's in every direction we look, the universe is growing. Now, what's really freaky is to think, well, what's beyond it? What's it growing into, right? But it's expanding. We can measure that. We can see that, right? And so in 1927, Edward Hubble, again, Hubble, Eddington, Einstein did not want evidence of an expanding universe because they knew what that meant is that then the universe is finite, it's not infinite. If it's not infinite, pantheism is wrong. So, yeah.
Minor comment. Did Hubble find that not only was expanding, but that the expansion was accelerated?
I don't recall, but you are correct. It is accelerating. That is the observation today is that it's accelerating. Right? It's getting faster. Do you remember what the speed of the universe is expanding at? It's some ridiculous number.
At some point it will be faster than the speed of light. And we'll not be able to see the stars.
Wow. Right? Woo! I'm hoping for the Lord to come back before then. Right? The radiation echo is in the universe is akin to the glow you would see when you shut off an old tube type TV. Okay, who's old enough to remember that? Come on, be honest. So back in the day, you youngins, you don't remember this. Back in the day, if you were watching TV in old black and white, you'd turn it off and the tube would go, woo, and it kind of, and there's this glow and it just kind of fade away, right? Well, turns out the universe has a background glow called the cosmic microwave background radiation, or CMB. Now, what's interesting, it was discovered accidentally by astronomers Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias in 1964. They were trying to calibrate an antenna to listen to the universe. And no matter what they did, they always had this interference. And so they assumed that on the roof, I think they were at Princeton, on the roof where the antenna was located, they had a big problem with pigeons since they figured there was pigeon poo on the antenna. That was causing the interference. Well, they went up and cleaned the antenna. It was still there. And then they're like, whoa, that means there's a noise, there's a thing happening in the universe that we're measuring, right? So it was discovered by accident. It is believed to be the remnants of the first light when the universe exploded into existence, i.e. the Big Bang, or in Genesis chapter 1, when God said, let there be light. Boom, right? And so they believe this is that glow left over from that event. That glow of the Big Bang explosion is fading. Technically, it is stretching. Okay, the light is being stretched out of the microwave portion. In other words, from visible to microwave spectrum. Ultimately, we won't be able to see it at all. It'll just be radio waves. And that shift, or that stretching, is called the red shift. And so I got a little kind of demo. So here's the universe. And watch as the light gets stretched from the beginning, that first Big Bang, to present day, right? The light is moving, it's being stretched, and now we're in what's called the red shift portion. But eventually, if we live long enough, or the universe is around long enough, it'll just be radio waves. Here's the main point, the material point. What is fading is not infinite, right? If it's fading, it had a beginning, and it's going from bright to dim. Okay, it's not infinite, it is finite. What is finite had a beginning. The fading cosmic background radiation indicates that the universe had a beginning. What had a beginning has a cause. The universe has a cause, therefore the universe cannot be uncaused. Okay, G in our surge acrostic, great mass. So according to the Big Bang theory, the universe exploded from a single point and then expanded in all directions. That would mean that the greatest mass of energy would be at the edges of the universe, like the ripple from a pebble dropped into a pond. So when you throw a pebble in a pond, right, you put it and it goes boom, and the ripples at the outside have the kind of the biggest wave, right? So that's what we would expect if the Big Bang theory is right. Boom, the greatest mass of energy, it's not in the middle anymore, it's pushed out, it's out here on the edges. In 1992, the Hubble Space Telescope confirmed that, in fact, the greatest mass of energy is at the edge of the universe. We know them as quasars. In Show Me God at Cal Berkeley, one of the physicists there who was involved in this particular project, literally he said, "We are looking at the fingerprints of God." That was his quote, right? Not from the Bible, not from Pastor Paul. No, a physicist at Berkeley. That was, we're looking at the fingerprints of God. Confirmation that the universe began from a single point in time and space. Therefore, the universe has a beginning. Now, I know it sounds like I'm repeating myself, and I am. What has a beginning has a cause. The universe has a cause. Therefore, the universe cannot be uncaused. And then perhaps the most fun, Einstein's theory of general relativity. So in Einstein's theory of general relativity, he was seeking to prove that the universe is infinite. Remember, he was a pantheist. He wanted badly for the universe to be God. In other words, this is all God, right? That it had no beginning. In other words, he and Eddington and Hubble, they believed in what they called a static universe. It wasn't expanding, it wasn't contracting, it was infinite, static. Okay? Einstein published the field equations for his theory of general relativity in 1915. In other words, in scientific journals, he published the math, right, that other scientists could look at to see what he was saying about time and space and everything and gravitational, and that time and speed, right, bend gravity. Well, a few years later, Alexander Friedman, he looks like a pretty serious guy. In 1922, Russian mathematician Alexander Friedman found an error in Einstein's published math. This is where it gets fun. Einstein had introduced a fudge factor represented by a lambda. Here's what it looks like. So see the little circle there, the little red circle around the thing that looks like an A. That's the lambda in the Greek alphabet. And if you've done math like in algebra where you use functions, you put something there as a placeholder where you can put different values, plus or minus numbers in there, and it changes the result, right? Well, Einstein, wanting to show a static universe, divided by 0. Well, every first grader in California, well, at least if they're homeschooled, knows you can't divide by 0, right? You don't divide by 0. So he introduced this fudge factor into his equation for general relativity to produce a static universe. In other words, it has no beginning. But Friedman said, you can't do that, right? And what Friedman found is if you put a negative number into that lambda, you had a collapsing universe. If you put a positive, you had an expanding. In other words, it's not static, it's growing, it's moving, it's dynamic. If it's dynamic, it had a beginning. So after Friedman corrected Einstein's math equation for general relativity, it produced a universe that is dynamic, either expanding or contracting. That is a finite universe, okay? That is, the universe had a beginning, to which Einstein responded, real picture. After his fudge factor was exposed, Einstein called it, and I quote, the biggest blunder of his life. It admitted that the universe had a beginning, so it moved from pantheism to agnosticism. In other words, there must be a God who caused the universe. I just don't know who he is. Okay, and again, if you're interested, all of the citations for all of this is in this book. Here's the point: what had a beginning had a cause. The universe has a cause. Therefore, the universe cannot be uncaused. So we go back to cause and effect. We conclude then that the universe is not self-caused, because you can't cause yourself to exist. We just demonstrated by scientific observation, again, undeniably to Einstein, Eddington, Hubble, et cetera, down to the very present day, including George Smoot at Berkeley, including Alan Sandage of NASA, including. By the way, I have today, for your benefit, and you can download this, 28 pages, 10-point font, like single space or half space, I don't know, of scientists from every major university on planet Earth who say that Darwinian evolution is without foundation, right? That they're calling for it. No, it doesn't work, right? Evolution doesn't work. 28 pages, right? There's something like over 1,500. And we're talking about Nobel laureates. We're talking about Harvard, Princeton, Stanford. I mean, yeah, anyway. So it's not uncaused, as we just demonstrated. Therefore, the universe must be caused by another. And since another caused the universe to exist, the another, whatever or whoever, cannot be part of the universe, right? And the another must be wholly different from the universe. In other words, it can't be controlled by space, time, energy, and matter. In other words, this is something beyond the natural world. It transcends the natural universe. Thus, the another must be pure spirit, since the another created the material universe. Whatever created can't be what the universe is. It's something other. The another must be supernatural, in other words, beyond the natural. And the another had to create the material universe out of nothing, for nothing existed prior to its existence. And the another, does the another sound like anyone you know? And from God's Instagram post, here it is. Thus it is true that the theistic God exists and miracles are possible. So a quick review and then we'll take a break. Cosmological argument. Everything that begins had a cause. That's because things that begin cannot cause themselves to exist. The universe had a beginning, and we just proved it was surge. And by the way, there are so many other ways to prove it, but this is just one. Therefore, the universe had a cause. All right, let's take a 15-minute break. Let's all be back in our chairs by 7:20. So we had the horizontal cosmological argument. In other words, starting with beginning, moving horizontally. Now we look at vertical from bottom to top. So it goes like this. Something exists. Well, each of us can say, well, I do. And like Rene Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Cannot think unless you exist. So something exists. I do. Nothing cannot produce something. By the way, that is the oldest law of science. Nothing cannot produce something. Therefore, something exists eternally and necessarily, something beyond me. By necessarily, that means there's something necessary, a necessary one who produced me, because I know I haven't always been here. I exist, but I haven't always existed. Something is necessary, right? An ultimate cause that caused me. Number 4, I am not a necessary and eternal being since I changed. I didn't exist at one point. I was conceived in my mother's womb. I was born a baby. I grew up to be a teenager. I became an adult. One day, if the Lord tarries, I will die, right? I'm always changing, okay? So I'm not eternal, and I'm not necessary. I didn't produce myself, right? Something caused me to exist. Therefore, both God, a necessary being, in other words, the ultimate cause, the uncaused caused, and I, a contingent being, exist. In other words, I'm contingent upon he who is necessary. And that is the definition of theism. So let's go through that real quick. Point 1, it is an inescapable and undeniable truth that something exists. If we deny that we exist, then we affirm our existence in the fact of trying to deny it. In other words, you can only argue. You just can't. Hence, the existence is an undeniable and escapable truth. Again, back to Rene Descartes. I think, therefore I am. That is to say, the capacity to think is evidence of one's own existence. Point 2, it is likewise inescapable and undeniable, and nothing cannot produce something. It is one of the oldest laws of science known as ex nihilo, nihil fit, which means out of nothing, nothing comes, right? Or as Norm Geisler used to say, nothing is what rocks think about. But something does exist, the universe, which leads us to the next point. Point 3. Therefore, something exists eternally and necessarily because everything that does exist cannot be a contingent being. In other words, something had to cause all of this, right? If I'm a contingent being, there must be a necessary being that caused me and caused the universe to exist. That's because every contingent being is subject to change or can cease to exist, right? We can cease to exist. We don't have to exist. God alone is pure, what we call actuality. His existence and his essence are one and inseparable. Everyone else, everything else, can exist or not exist. Therefore, contingent beings need an unchanging, necessary being to cause their existence. Something caused us to exist. And, therefore, there cannot be an infinite regress of contingent beings, one causing another forever. In other words, somebody might say, well, no, there's not a necessary being, it just goes back forever, of one contingent being causing one contingent being. Your parents caused you to exist, their parents caused them to exist, their grandparents, blah, 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 all the way back. But that's not possible because an infinite cannot be traversed. In other words, you can't just go back infinitely with contingent beings because an infinite can't be traversed. In other words, like we talked about before, we know that time began because today is here. If there's an infinite regression of moments going backwards, we never get to here. We can never get here because there has to be a starting point. If there's not a starting point, it keeps moving away from us. It's like trying to add another day to an infinite. Every time you add one, it's like it's just infinite. You can't do it. Or people have illustrated, like could say that mathematically, from one end of a bookshelf to another, there are mathematically an infinite number of points. True, theoretically. But you cannot squeeze an infinite number of books in that space. Does that make sense? So a true infinite, we can't traverse. So there's no such thing as an infinite going back and going back and going back and going back and going back of contingent beings causing contingent beings. There had to be a starting point. Therefore, there must be one being that is not caused, uncaused, which is the cause of all contingent beings, a necessary being. So, all right. This being does not have potential change and therefore is pure existence. And the fancy metaphysical word that you can use at Starbucks this week is actuality. So when we talk about actuality and potentiality, God is pure actuality. He has no potential change. He is perfect in every way. The only reason you change is to either add, a perfection to correct an imperfection, right? Or to lose something that you didn't need, but God is perfect. He never changes. You and I are a combination of actuality and potentiality. We're continually changing until we are glorified, and then we are completed potentiality. By the way, angels are completed potentiality. That's why angels can't repent. Oh. When Lucifer sinned, that was his final choice. So when's the last time that a human being can repent and not end up in the eternal lake of fire? I rebuke you. Sorry. Right, your last breath. As soon as a person dies, right, it is appointed unto man once to die once, and then the judgment, right? With angels, they sinned before time existed. Oh, so when they sinned, we call them eternal. They had a beginning, but they're eternal. So they are what we call completed potentiality. Point 4, I am not a necessary and eternal being. And I hope you guys will all agree that you are not a necessary and eternal being. And we know that the evidence is I change. I once did not exist and now I do. I was once a child and now I'm an adult. I am always changing. Everything that changes needs a cause and therefore cannot be necessary and eternal, which brings us to our conclusion, point 5. Therefore, both God, a necessary being, and I, a contingent being, exist. So, review of that real quick. Something exists. I do. Nothing cannot produce something. Therefore, something exists eternally and necessarily. I am not a necessary and eternal being since I change. That's the evidence. Therefore, both God, a necessary being, and I, a contingent being, exist, which is the theistic worldview. I personally like the first argument better, the horizontal, but some people prefer the vertical. So, moving on. The teleological argument. This argues from design, so it's back to William Paley and the idea that of a watchmaker. You know, we see design in nature. The teleological argument has two forms. It presents arguments from astronomy and arguments from microbiology. So kind of two different ways of looking at things, the macro and the micro. We begin with astronomy. Anticipatory design, you're thinking, really? Another word? Okay, anticipatory design shows an intelligent designer. So by way of example, here in California, we anticipate that the ground will move. We have historical data that says we have a lot of faults in this state, and not just politically, but like the ground shakes, right? And so we design buildings anticipating an earthquake, right? In other words, we design them to survive an earthquake. That's anticipatory. We anticipate something happening, therefore we design for that eventuality. Well, when we look at human life, it shows anticipatory design, and not just humans, but the entire universe. Hence, human life shows or demonstrates an intelligent designer. This argument is based on what is called the anthropic principle. So think of anthropology, the study of man. Anthro means man. I can't see it now. Anthropic principle, which shows evidence that the universe is fine-tuned for the emergence of human life. In other words, as we look at the universe, the way the earth is built, the way the universe is, we see evidence all around us that it was made specifically for human life to exist. So, one example, okay, the habitable zone. The earth is perfectly placed in our solar system for life. Any closer to the sun, we would burn up. Any further from the sun, we would freeze. And we have a link. I would encourage you, there's a movie that I gave you a link to. It's called The Privileged Planet. And it's about an hour and a half film, and it's looking at some of the anthropic principles, or what we call anthropic constants, that show just how finely tuned the world and the universe is to have life on this planet. So, for example, the Earth's atmosphere has just the right amount of oxygen for life at 21%. If there were any more, we would burn up. In other words, you get above 25% and things just spontaneously begin to burn. Not a good idea, right? For things just to like boom. Any less and we would suffocate. So less than 20%, there's not enough oxygen to support life. When we look at the way that our solar system is structured, right, the presence of other planets serve a purpose, not just pretty to look at. The huge planet Jupiter protects the Earth from cosmic debris by pulling them in with its massive gravitational pull. In other words, there are numerous things that if they crashed into the Earth, the meteor, comet, whatever, would destroy all life on Earth. But Jupiter's sitting like a big magnet that's just sucking those things in that implode on the planet Jupiter rather than hitting the Earth. The fine-tuning of the universe. There are 209 known, at least that we're aware of, anthropic constants that make life possible on Earth. Now here's the interesting point. Change any one of them and life does not exist. So it's not just oxygen, it's the proportion of oxygen to carbon dioxide to nitrogen to argon, all the things in our atmosphere that are necessary. Change any one of them and life doesn't exist. Okay. By the way, when you read Revelation chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 19, if you're paying attention, what you will recognize is that the entire anthropic constants, all of them that provide an environment here on earth that supports life, are destroyed. That's why in Matthew 24, Jesus said, unless those days were shortened. What days? The days of the tribulation. He said, no flesh would survive. And by the time you get through the sealed judgments, the trumpet judgments, and the bowl judgments, the earth is literally incapable of supporting life. It's been turned into a massive graveyard. We don't have the atmosphere, we don't have the oceans, we don't have the natural cooling, we don't have the trees, the grass, the food. I mean, it's just been decimated. And unless Jesus was to return, all life would cease. Evidence for anticipatory design, by the way, that we see in these 209 known anthropic constants, not random chance. Sir Isaac Newton observed, and I quote, "It is not to be conceived that mere mechanical causes could give birth to so many regular motions, since the comets range all over parts of the heavens in very eccentric orbits. This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed for the counsel and dominion of intelligent and powerful being." Stephen Hawking himself, right, agnostic or atheist, depending on who you ask, I quote, "The laws of science as we know them at present contain many fundamental numbers, like the size of the electric charge of the electron and the ratio of the masses of the proton and the electron. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been finely adjusted to make possible the development of life." So he's an atheist, or again, some say agnostic, but the evidence shows everything is finely tuned so that life can exist on earth. But he chose to reject that truth. Sir Frederick Hoyle, who was an agnostic and became a believer, said, and I quote, "A commonplace interpretation of the facts suggests that a superintelligent has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." In other words, something out there has finely tuned not just the planet Earth, but the entire universe to support life on Earth. And Alan Sandage, American astronomer, staff member emeritus with the Carnegie Observatory, who charted the Hubble constant, recipient of multiple honors, said, and I quote, "We can't understand the universe in any clear way without the supernatural." And for both the people taking for credit and not credit, I have an article you can read about Alan Sandage this week and how he went from atheism to faith in Christ, based on one of the arguments that we'll be talking about tonight. The Big Bang, the most cataclysmic event we can imagine on closer inspection, appears finely orchestrated. In other words, even looking at the beginning, when it went boom, it wasn't just an explosion, there was purpose and design in it. George Smoot, again, one of the people prominently spoken of here, who was involved in the research that discovered, what he called the fingerprints of God in the universe. And then Richard Morris said, and I quote, "How is it that common elements such as carbon, nitrogen, oxygen happened to have just the right kind of atomic structure that they needed to combine to make the molecules upon which life depend? It is almost as though the universe had been consciously designed." So again, this is a testimony of that, not Pastor Damien and Pastor Paul or whoever, not theologians, but physicists, scientists, astrophysicists who are just looking at the information saying it looks like it was designed that way. And again, right here from Discovery Institute, 28 pages that you're welcome to look at, and I have the link on the website. You can download it to your own computer, and if you can't print it, they sent me a link that you can print, so shoot me an email, I'll give you one you can print. Okay, who say life didn't just happen. Anticipatory design is seen in the Genesis account. In other words, we see that in divine scripture. Day 1, God created light. Day 2, God created atmosphere and firmament. Day 3, God created dry ground and vegetation. Day 4, God created the solar system. Day 5, God created birds and sea creatures. Day 6, God created land animals. And last of all, people. That is, all of God's creative activity was in anticipation of and for people who were created in His image. In other words, God created the earth, to support life, and primarily the life of people that he placed in the garden. So a review from astronomy. Anticipatory design shows an intelligent designer, i.e. anticipatory earthquake design. We anticipate the need for design, and so we design for it. Human life shows anticipatory design. Hence, human life shows an intelligent designer. Review from microbiology, argument A. Specified complexity has an intelligent designer. First life has specified complexity, hence, first life had intelligent design. In other words, when we talk about first life, we're talking about the creation event, right? And so we're going to show that it's not by evolution, but it's by a creator. And we know that because we see specified complexity in first life. So let's look at it. Specified complexity is defined as follows. So we'll use an illustration. A single letter of the alphabet is specified without being complex, i.e. it conforms to an independently given pattern, but it's simple. In other words, if I draw an A on the whiteboard, we all know what that symbol represents, right? It represents a sound in English or whatever language you're speaking. So that symbol, those lines, they're not just random, they're an intelligently designed symbol that has specificity. In other words, we know that represents A. A long sequence of random letters is complex without being specified. That is, the combination of letters doesn't actually mean anything. So, for example, I just started typing. So you got all those letters, right? Well, it doesn't mean anything. Lots of specificity, but or complexity, but it doesn't mean anything. All right. A Shakespearean sonnet is both complex and specified. That is, Shakespeare carefully specified which letters of the alphabet to use to form complex poetry. Right? Does that make sense? They're not just random letters. So we pick the letters he wanted to form the words he wanted to write a poem. Specified complexity. Question, do we see specified complexity in living things? And the answer is yes, abundantly. I was just talking to a guy after the service Sunday morning. He was speaking to me about the sermon I taught on Sunday. Turns out he's a PhD in microbiology. He's an MD. He working as a doctor at Kaiser's. And he said for him, it was all settled when he studied cellular biology. So that's it. I mean, God exists. You can't deny it. He says, we observe specified complexity in the information found in creation that cannot be explained in any other way than an intelligent designer. So by way of example, okay, what's that say in your little alphabet soup or cereal? Right? Thank you. I'll let you see it. Okay. So it would be like finding a message filled out in your morning alphabet cereal. You pour the cereal right before the milk, and all of a sudden you have like, what? Right? Or seeing a message in the sky, right? GMOs. The point is that someone must have arranged the letters in our cereal bowl when we weren't looking, or in the case of the sky, the airplane must have read the message in the sky. Either happened by random chance. Okay? So the point is that we find the same specified complexity in life. For example, our DNA is an alphabet made up of 4 letters. We have 26 in the English alphabet. Our DNA has 4 letters. Those 4 letters are combined to create a message with 3 billion base pairs. Specified complexity. Each coded with a specific and complex information to build a human being. Now think about this. It's not like just getting a blueprint, right, from IKEA with all the parts. No. When you're talking about a fertilized egg, an ovum is fertilized, you have all the instructions to make the parts and then to put it together. The information-coded DNA forms a language by which information is communicated within our cells. It is literally no different than the specified complexity found in written communication like Shakespeare's sonnets. Okay, and again, not my opinion. It is Herbert Gottlieb, physicist of information theorist, stated, and I quote, "It is important to understand that we are not reasoning by analogy. The sequence hypothesis," is talking about the DNA code, "applies directly to the protein and genetic text as well as to written language, and therefore the treatment is mathematically identical." In other words, if you look at the Shakespeare sonnet, A monkey didn't write this. It didn't happen by chance. Your first graders just, with a keyboard, some intelligent person wrote that. He says when you look at the DNA, it's exactly the same. But to a much, much greater complexity. John Lennox, again from Oxford, while at dinner with a colleague who was an atheist, and the colleague made this statement while they were seated, and I quote, "Nothing exists beyond physics and chemistry." In other words, there's no purpose in life, there's no meaning to life, right? Again, back to like skepticism and just wait. So John pointed out 2 words on the menu and asked his friend, quote, "Explain to me those marks based only on paper and ink." To which his friend responded, after a moment's silence, his colleague, a leading biochemist, world-renowned by the way, admitted, quote, "One cannot explain meaning apart from intelligence." So where you find design, whether it's on a menu or in a book or in coding of DNA, there's a designer behind it. It didn't happen by chance. The point is that even the simplest words demonstrate specified complexity, which points to an intelligent designer. How much more does the immensely complex language coded in the human genome point to those capitalized and intelligent designer? And the point is this: random marks communicate little, but specifically arranged marks designed to represent meaning communicate information. Question just for fun: how much information? The human brain stores as much information as is contained in 20 million encyclopedias. Now, again, people who reject this, right, they use this same logic to look for extraterrestrial life. So since the early 60s, we've had SETI here, and again, Arizona or New Mexico, I don't know, somewhere in the Southwest, which stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So that's, if you watch E.T., right, you saw those big antennas. Those antennas are pointed at space and they're just listening. They're listening for radio signals. What are they listening for? Specified complexity. Because if they hear specified complexity, they know there's an intelligent designer. That means someone's out there speaking, right? So the researchers at SETI recognize that one single radio transmission, not billions of DNA code like in the human body, right? Just one single radio transmission containing a non-random repeating signal would constitute a message of specified complexity. In other words, if they just got a thing that's dot, dot, dash, dash, they would know there's someone out there, right? Well, if that's evidence for an intelligent source, or those extraterrestrials, then when they looked at the human body, and the coding in the our DNA, that screams that there's someone out there that's designed that. Someone's trying to communicate with us. So how much more does specified complexity of our DNA provide evidence of an intelligent designer, not a message from ET, but a message from God, which is, again, the whole point of this book, Show Me God. And again, whether you look macro, out of the universe, micro within the body, there's a message. From microbiology, okay, specified complexity has, or here's a quick review, has an intelligent designer. First life has specified complexity, hence first life has an intelligent designer. Argument B, that's from irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity has an intelligent designer, for example, a mousetrap. You just don't find mousetraps right laying out before. Somebody killed them. First life has evidence of irreducible complexity. Hence, first life has an intelligent designer. So the other book you want to read is Darwin's Black Box by microbiologist Michael Behe. And he argues, so we looked at the universe, now you want to look inside the body. He provides, again, just irrefutable evidence that this didn't happen by chance in bodies. So microbiologist Michael Behe introduced the concept of what he called irreducible complexity. So we define it. Irreducible complexity says that, like the mousetrap, you have a certain minimum of parts you absolutely must have for this thing to work. You don't have all these parts, it doesn't work. So with a mousetrap, you have 5. You have a platform to hold it all together. You have a spring, and you have a holding bar, hammer, and it'll catch, right? It's weighted into that cheese. So as soon as the mouse takes the cheese, it springs, snaps, closes, the mouse is dead, right? Miss any of those parts, and the mousetrap doesn't work. Okay? If one part is removed, it doesn't matter which part, it does not work. There are 5 unique parts to a mousetrap, yet removing one of them, the trap will not work. The point here is that in an evolutionary model, if the mousetrap was evolved, all 5 parts have to come into existence at the same moment to work. If you miss one, it doesn't work. Okay? So it can't move forward. It's done. If they did not, the evolutionary chain would be broken, forward progress ceases. Likewise, biological components or aspects of components cannot function unless all parts are present. For example, the simplest of life forms and functions have considerably more parts than a mouse trap. Yet, like a mouse trap, every part must exist simultaneously for it to work properly, or it doesn't work. Like, think about the evolution of the eye. At what point does something decide, no, it'll be a lot better if I can see? And it just decides that we're going to grow up, whatever. It doesn't work. You have to have everything in place, or it doesn't work. Well, that doesn't match the evolutionary model that causes complex forms being about by small changes over periods of time. Like the mousetrap, if all you have is the spring, and you don't catch any mice. So too, if all you have is of a human or skin cells, evolutionary chain breaks. Again, speaking of humans, all the information required to build a person is coded in a fertilized ovum, which is 20 times smaller than the head of man. That's a lot of information. And you get, right? That huge. Right? And again, I mean, anyone who has ever had a child and been in the delivery room, it's like, wow. I mean, you just don't have words. It's just like, how in the world? Like, you look at those little toes, and like, it's just so amazing. And there's that cool guy. Yeah, if you can catch and train an eagle to hunt for you, yeah, that's what people do when they don't have Nintendo. Anyways. By the way, that single fertilized ovum contains all the information required to build a human body with approximately 37 trillion cells, composed of 200 different types of parts in the human body, which includes 206 different bones, 78 different organs, connected by 60,000 miles of tubing. Now, I'm not making this up. This is from, Gray's Anatomy, the standard textbook, right? 60,000 miles of arteries, veins, capillaries, and nerves. 32 adult teeth, covered with 2 different types of skin and 6 different types of hair. If you were to take the DNA in your body and lay it out end to end in a single line, it would measure 49,466,117,639 miles. One body. You could go back and forth the sun 600 times that distance. And that's all coded in something that, right, is smaller than the head of a pin. By the way, all necessary at the same time or no life. The evolution process would cease and have to start all over again. In other words, if you get so far and then it just fails, it doesn't, like the next thing to evolve doesn't start there, it has to start from ground zero again. But let's just imagine, for sake of argument, that despite the impossibility of building a human being with all its specified complexity by random chance, all forward progress would collapse if that human being could not reproduce. So let's just say that by random chance you got one person, right? Here we are, planet Earth, and you got success, right? What are the odds that 2 humans, 1 male, 1 female, perfectly matched for reproduction would be created by random chance and end up in the same place at the same time so that they could reproduce, so that it could continue the evolutionary chain? I mean, it's just because the numbers get so ridiculous that the odds of creating life by chance are 0. There is no conceivable way to account naturally for the development of simple, let alone complex life forms by unguided random chance chemical reactions as claimed by evolutionary theory. Therefore, there must be an intelligent designer. So let's just talk to some scientists, right? Not Pastor Paul, let's talk to scientists. So this is Michael Behe, and microbiologist at Lehigh University. Quote, no one, how many? No one at Harvard University, no one at the National Institute of Health, that's the NIH, no member of the National Academy of Science, no Nobel Prize winner, no one, that is no one anywhere at any time, can give a detailed account of how the psyllium, which is one of the simplest, right, single cells in our body, or vision, or blood clotting, or any complex biochemical process might have developed in a Darwinian fashion, right? And challenge people, show them. The conclusion of intelligent design flows naturally from the data itself. In other words, we're not talking about the Bible. We're just looking at the information that we as microbiologists, can discern. Not from sacred books or sectarian beliefs. Inferring that biochemical systems were designed by an intelligent agent is a humdrum process that requires no principles of logic or science. Life on Earth at its most fundamental level, in its most critical components, is the product of intelligent activity. In other words, it's just plain as day, you can see it. Lynn Gillis, distinguished university professor of biology at the University of Massachusetts, writes, and I quote, history will judge neo-Darwinian theory, so neo meaning new, so like the modern Darwinians, as a minor 20th century, listen, religious sect within the sprawling religious persuasion of Anglo-Saxon biology. In other words, you study biology in other countries than Anglo-Saxon, England, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, they're not as thrilled with the whole Darwinian point of view as we are. And again, I'm going to look at it, and these are people saying it doesn't work, right? Paleontologists now is Elridge, so paleontologists are people who look at fossils, right? He says, here's the problem with evolution, and I quote, no wonder paleontologists shied away from evolution for so long. It never seems to happen. And now, by the way, I give you a quote from Richard Dawkins, one of the four horsemen of atheism, who confirms this to be true. Jerry Coyle of the Department of Ecology and Evolution at the University of Chicago arrives at the unanticipated verdict, and I quote, we conclude unexpectedly, there's little chance for the neo-Darwinian view. Its theoretical foundations and the experimental evidence supporting it are weak. And then a big quote, you won't be able to see it very well, I'll read it to you. This is Sir Frederick Coyle and his partner Chandra, whoever, I can't pronounce her last name, in their book Evolution from Space. So they're the ones that talked about that. They realized there wasn't enough on Earth for life to spontaneously begin. So they figured chemicals must have been, transferred here from outer space. So they looked in outer space, and here's their conclusion. I quote, life cannot have had a random beginning. The trouble is that the trouble is that there are about 2,000 enzymes, and the chance of obtaining them all in a random trial is only 1 part in 10 to the 40,000th power. That's a 10 to 40,000 zeros. An outrageously small probability that could not be faced, even if the whole universe consisted of an organic soup, in other words, chemicals to produce life. If one is not prejudiced, either by social belief or scientific training, into the conviction that life originated in the Earth, the simple calculation wipes the idea entirely out of the court. The enormous information content of even the simplest living systems cannot, in our view, be generated by what are often called natural, in other words, Darwinian evolution, processes. Notice he says, for life to originate on the Earth, it would be necessary that quite explicit instruction should have been provided for its assembly. It was not random. Somebody had to come up with a design and make that thing. There's no way in which we can expect to avoid the need for information. No way in which we can simply get by with a bigger and better organic soup as we ourselves hoped might be possible a year or two ago. In other words, they launched out their thesis was, we look in the universe, we'll find enough stuff to show that life could happen by chance. Their conclusion, it can't. Again, 1 times 10 to the 40,000 equals the same chance of finding a single particular atom while searching the entire universe blankly. I'm sorry, what? So you take an atom, you just kind of tag it somehow, put out Andromeda or something like that, and then you send an astronaut to just kind of randomly go on blindfolded, and the first time just grab that atom, right? That's 1 times 10 to 40,000. So here's what Richard Dawkins confessed. I quote, and this is from his book, The Blind Watchmaker, is trying to refute intelligent design. He says, it is though they, the fossils, were just planted there, without any evolutionary history. Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists, oh you bet. He says both schools of thought, punctuationists and gradualists, so 2 schools of evolution, despise so-called scientific creationists. In other words, they just can't even, like, we aren't real scientists. Equally, and both agree that the major gaps are real. In other words, they look at the fossil record and go, okay, the evidence says, right, that there are true imperfections in fossil record. Now notice what he says, the only alternative explanation of this sudden appearance of so many complex halotypes in the Cambrian era is divine creation. And we both reject this alternative. So now think about that. So he's honest enough to say, right, we reject it, not on scientific evidence, but because they refuse to believe in the Creator. So it's willful volitional rejection. It's not objective. It's subjective. Does it make sense? And that's true across the board. I can quote the Leakey family and go on and on. I mean, they just all of this is saying, evidence says there's a Creator. We don't believe in a Creator, so we're going to keep looking. Okay. So again, how do evolutionists respond to the overwhelming complexity of life that militates against evolution? So Robert Jastrow, you should know that name, he's the director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. He was the driving force behind the Apollo moon missions and all of that. An agnostic, by the way, started as an atheist, became an agnostic. Here's what he wrote, and I quote in small print that you can download it. He says, theologians generally are delighted with a proof that the universe had a beginning. We just talked about that. But astronomers are curiously upset about this. Right? Their reactions provide an interesting demonstration of the response of the scientific mind, which is supposedly a very objective mind. It's interesting, he says, when the evidence uncovered by science itself leads to conflict with the articles of faith in our profession. I'm sorry, the what? Faith in the religion of science, right? And that article of faith is that there is no God. He says, quote, it turns out that the scientist behaves the way the rest of us do when our beliefs are in conflict with the evidence. What happens is we become irritated. We pretend that the conflict does not exist. We paper it over with meaningless phrases. See, we're talking about the leading scientists of the 20th century, right? The mind behind the U.S. space program, right? I mean, this is the guy who says, the evidence all points to God, but scientists get really upset when you point that out. Right? That our own science tells us there is a God. Even Darwin recognized that irreducible complexity destroys theory. See, all he was looking at was the outside the enemy. What he didn't know about was the information in cells that breeds them, right? He said, and I quote again, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, then my theory would absolutely break down. Origin Species. By the way, you should read the title page on the inside of Origin Species, the original copy. It says the Origin Species, right? And we're talking about I'm going to miss up this is paraphrasing, the subjection of the races to the supreme race. And basically saying the white race, civilized in the rest of the world, is to be captured and destroyed. You can read about that in Darwin's Plantation. Where, by the way, in the United States of America, we put a person in the zoo in the Bronx in 1900. Pygmy captured in Australia based on Darwinian evolution, which is racist in its core, put a man in the zoo. And it was the church that responded and said, you can't do that. That's a man. So, how does Richard Dawkins decide? side life gets here? Well, aliens must have seen the life on Earth. In other words, it's just another way of saying God did, right? Because it didn't happen here, so how did it happen? Well, super intelligent beings, right? Beyond our planet and our intelligence, we can see life. But then there's Michael Roos, who believes that life's spontaneous, generated on acts of Christmas. All right, moving on. Argument B, okay. Irreducible complexity as an intelligent designer, like the first life had or had irreducible complexity. His first life had an intelligent designer. I like what Louis Pasteur said. Quote, a little knowledge of science makes you an atheist. In-depth knowledge of science makes you believe in God. Alright, so again, some good books for you. I'll show you all the resources. You want to come look at them afterwards. They're up here. This one is fascinating again because, I mean, I had no idea. So the guy's name, by the way, is Adabinga, pygmy captured in Africa, in chains, brought over a boat, put in monkey cages, as if he was evidence of evolution. And by the way, the Australian government, using Darwin's theory of evolution, that was their motivation for destroying the Maori people and native Australians. They justified it, and Darwin approved it, because he said that the superior races have to do away with the other races. Homework. Homework for students not seeking credit. Memorize Romans chapter 1, verse 19 and 20. And point 3. Who the theistic God exists. Read pages 21 to 35A of chapter 3 from 12 points to show Christian history. If you want to read the whole chapter, you can, but I'm breaking down to recent weeks. If you're seeking credit, you're going to memorize the same thing. Romans 1, 19 and 20, point 3, the theistic God exists. And read chapters 3 to 5. I don't have faith to be an atheist. And you're going to read the article about Alan Sandage's conversion to Christ. You're going to tell me which of the arguments we covered tonight did Alan Sandage look at and say, that's evidence for God in a good way. All right. And also, for those taking credit, be sure to complete the handouts, study questions, and term concepts. I have them up here for you in class. And then write a brief summary by the author, Alan Sandage became a Christian. Be sure to define which of the arguments covered or we covered class. Okay, so real quick, if you go to your webpage, look at all the resources I have for you. Not required, but I want you to understand, this isn't just Pastor Paul or guys who are, first of all, you got point 3 taught by Norman Geisler, so the same class I did tonight, I'm doing next week. You can watch Dr. Geisler. The book, The Privileged Planet by Guillermo Gonzalez and Ray Richards. Guillermo Gonzalez worked at NASA. His specialty was to find planets in the universe that were likely like Earth, so that if we ever got to the point where we needed to move, that we could move. What he found? There are none. It's this planet. God made this one for us. Okay, the universe may be younger than we thought. Abigail Beale, again, scientific observations. And then if you want to watch the movie, The Privileged Planet, instead of reading the book, it's an hour and a half. I have a link to the movie, so you can watch it here, or you can YouTube it and watch it on your TV at home. The book Showing Me God, which I have up here, or you want to read that. Darwin's Black Box, which I have up here, you can look at that. The Scientific Descent of Darwin, that's like you pulling up over 1,500 world-renowned scientists from literally every university on planet Earth to say evolution doesn't work. Evidence for anticipatory design in our solar system, I've got an article for you there. Evidence of fine-tuning, another article there. The Discovery Institute, an entire website with information. By the way, if you are a homeschooler, parent, they have curriculum for primary, secondary, and college that you can look at. And the thing I love about the intelligent design movement and creationism, they look at evolution and you go to public school, you only get one. They don't give you a choice, right? Well, if you're so sure that this is true, why don't you let's present both sides and let's see where the evidence is, right? And then God and the Laws of Science, their article, and then all the slides for tonight are up there.